Hi everyone, welcome to MMA The Beginning, where we talk about the early days of MMA. My guest this week is a comedian. He is an MMA broadcaster, commentator. He also has several podcasts out. To be honest, I can't keep up with him because he's doing so much. That's the reason I've got him on the show. Bryan Lacey, how are you, mate?
I'm hairy, mate. That's what I am. Look at this. Lockdown is certainly... I don't mean to mock you, mate. I don't mean to mock at the minute, but that is a serious bit of growth.
It is very serious bit of growth. It's obviously it's the lockdown beard, I suppose.
It's and I've realised it was this week, the first week. My wife's kind of went, "Are we keeping it? Are we going to keep this beard? What are we doing with this beard?" So
yeah,
I think she's about ready to get rid.
Oh, she really? I love it how it's your wife's decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's
mate, of course it is.
My missus hates it when I shave, like, because I fully bick it. So obviously I put the shaving foam all around. I look like Santa. Do you know what I mean? And I whip the lot off because I just can't stand being too stubbly. But my missus actually likes a little bit of stubble. So
likes a bit of rough, eh? Likes a bit of rough.
Yeah, actually, during lockdown, it's made me quite grateful for being bald because the amount of people who were kicking off about the fact the hairdressers are closed and everything like that. You know what I mean? You've seen me pull it up quite well, though, mate, to be honest.
Danny, listen, if the hair's fine, I just can't get my nails done. That's what's really upsetting me during lockdown. It's the nails that are killing it, my friend.
What a great way to camp something up at the beginning of an MMA podcast. You know what I
mean? Listen, I can bring camp to anything, mate. I've been stood ringside. And I've had many a strange look during a fight with some of my antics going on. So brace yourself for more of that.
Oh, brilliant stuff. Brilliant. Well, first of all, thanks so much for coming on the show, Bryan. I mean, I first met you when we were doing a gig in Storrington. And
don't let everyone know about the glamour, mate.
Oh,
Storrington, the Vegas of the South.
It is the Vegas of the South. Do you know what I mean? We do the top gigs, mate. You know what I mean? Even sometimes if it's a backyard booth or somewhere, you know what I mean, to an arena, we treat all our gigs the same, don't we?
We're 100%, mate. Yeah, that's it. They're all the same. The audience always leaves slightly disappointed with mine, so that's fine.
Well, to be fair, there weren't that many, because there was one story in particular that you were telling about your stag do, and you were on about, as opposed to going to Hamburg and getting absolutely wasted, or going to, Amsterdam or somewhere like that, and tying you to a lamppost naked, I'd say your mates were probably a bit more evil to you on this instance. Would you like to tell all the listeners about your stag do and what happened? And this is why I become friends with you.
So yeah, basically, I've always obviously been a fan of MMA. I sit up and watch it a lot, and it's one of the spots. It's the only spot. I bore my mates senseless trying to get them into it, trying to drag them into my world. And then it was my brother was my best man, and he organised my stag do down in Brighton. So it was I just thought it was going to be out on the lash, go around a few clubs. We had a little rented house. Just it wasn't even a big stag. There was probably about 10 people there, something like that.
Yeah.
So we went out. We did the standard Friday night. Absolutely hammered on the Friday night. Stumbled to bed at about 4:30 in the morning. Didn't think anything else of it. Wondered what the next day would bring. Then I get a knock on my door at 9:30 Saturday morning, and my brother literally just threw some gym kit at me and said, "Put that on. Follow me." So I stick this on. I'm still hungover. I'm feeling rough. They shove a sausage sandwich in my face. And then we walk through Brighton. I don't know what we're doing. We're like marching through the centre of Brighton, and I don't know what's going on.
Protest you didn't even know existed. You're like,
exactly right. Yeah, this is it. It was the worst Pride march Brighton has ever seen. I'll tell you that now, Danny. And there's certainly no pride involved. And then suddenly he just stopped, and we were stood outside. I sat on this wall, and I looked behind me, and I realised it was an MMA gym, and I was like, "Wait a minute, what's this?" And we wandered in there, and we honestly, mate, I was hanging, and straight in there, no warm up, no nothing, straight in there. I had to do a strength and conditioning session to start with. Then they showed us some basic technique with some jiu-jitsu, some grappling. Then they let us roll around together a little bit to practice that, and that was quite good fun. So because I got to armbar my brother and strangle him as well.
Revenge on him, yeah.
Oh mate, I got a sweet, because he doesn't know the sport very well, and even though in a little bit kind of, so I was able to do that. So I was feeling yeah, you brought me down here and I just smashed a lot of you, haven't I, like that.
And that's a confidence booster to get you over your hangover. Do you know what I mean? So that's not give you a second win then.
Adrenaline's going. Who needs Red Bull? I'm shadow boxing, head movement, all that. And then this big bloke taps me on the shoulder and he says, "Right, just come into the ring." And they put me in the cage, and in walks the slightest, the most unassuming, the most humble, the most gentle 17-year-old lad. This kid's 17 years old, and I said, "Right, we're going to put you in with him just for a bit of a giggle. Just 1 3-minute round, Danny. 1 3-minute round against this." And I got murdered. Absolutely murdered. He beat me up, threw me on the mat. And the thing is, there's a difference between men and women. Like the ladies would never do that to each other. You never hear about ladies doing anything stupid. You never. They have a great time. They go out there. They have a few drinks. They look after each other. But they come together. Whereas my mates, they did the thing. Mate, they did this thing where I was getting smashed up, and I looked up to see what they were doing, thinking they were to jump over and save me, and they're all just stood there holding their phones, mate. Just holding their phones,
laughing,
just filming it.
Put it on Snapchat. Look at my mate getting his ass kicked. This is hilarious. He could possibly get his arm broken or get some brain damage off an elbow.
2 weeks before the wedding, Danny. 2 weeks before the wedding as well, and I'm getting smashed up. That's no good, is it?
No, not at all. But I suppose boys will be boys. Do you know what I mean? It's just the way it is. And
that's
actually,
the beauty of it.
I shouldn't have had you on talking about this story, because I'm getting married next year, and I think you might have given some of my mates an idea of what they might do to me for my stag do. If I'm honest.
Listen,
and the worst thing about it is,
go on.
The worst thing about it is, I'm on about going to Krakow in Poland, and I can imagine there's a brutal MMA gym there, probably. Do you know what I mean? And they'll probably put me with some big house of a man who would just pick me up with one hand and choke slam me, even though it's not even an MMA move. I suppose it's like when Bob Sapp done the powerbomb on Nogueira. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I mean, I'll end up fighting someone like Bob Sapp, because that's how brutal my mates are. They're horrible.
Well, listen, if your mates do want to get in touch with me, I do know a couple of gyms out in Poland. They're lovely guys as well. I'm sure they'll look after you very nicely.
But I mean, doing that hungover as well, mate, that must have been, because it's bad enough. Like, I'll go training at the gym, because I don't do it as often. I'll go there maybe once every other month, and I'll have a roll with the lads, and I am absolutely fucked after 45 minutes. Do you know what I mean? So doing that pissed must have been like, even for 3 minutes, this is what people don't understand, you know? You say to someone, I'm going to have a fight for 3 minutes, like, oh yeah, you'll be all right. You just dance around, throw a few jabs. No. Not when someone's picking you up and slamming you into the mat and elbowing you in the face when you're on the floor. It's not very pleasant, is it?
Do you know, and I said this to my brother, the only blessing, the only defense I had, I didn't have a good escape from a triangle, or I couldn't fight off a rear naked choke, but my breath kept them at bay for quite a while. That Cumberland sausage sandwich mixed with yesterday's Jaeger bombs, that was my best defense, mate.
Well, there you go. I mean, you know what I mean? You've got to use everything in your arsenal, haven't you, in order to overcome these things. I suppose it's like, there's that myth about the French rugby team. You know, they cover themselves in garlic and everything. So when you get in the scrum with them, it's just absolutely rank, you know. It's a good tactic to use, actually. Before long, USADA will ban that. You know what I mean? You're not allowed to eat garlic now before.
We're testing you for garlic. Yeah, we've got traces of garlic that you
traces of garlic tablets. So we're going to have to test every single thing that they sell in Holland and Barrett now. Do you know what I mean? So we're carrying out garlic tablets.
Mate, but there's rumours that some fighters do that, so they won't wash a few days before the fight, so they'll their body will smell. They'll eat onions. They'll put onions in, and it'll put off their opponent when they're in there. There's the hilarious one where a guy taps out to a fart. That's gone viral on mid grappling, and this guy farts, and the other guy just taps and just walks off, just like this. I mean, does that make you a legend or an animal, mate? What is it? Which
don't
one
know,
is it?
mate.
In the pub, I'm buying that guy a pint. I am buying him a pint.
That is brilliant. Someone tapped up to a far. It reminds me of the stories, like, you know, obviously talking about the old pro wrestling days. Apparently, Andre the Giant used to get people in the corner and he used to sit on them and he used to fart. And I mean, a man who is that big farting on you, that must have been absolutely rank. Do you know what I mean? But anyway, talking about the early days of MMA, Bryan. So, what was your first experience of watching MMA fights?
Well, do you know what? But before I talk about seeing it, it was what I heard about it. That's what really enticed me. I was always into combat sports. It's the only sport me and my dad watched together. He wasn't into football. He wasn't into rugby really.
Yeah.
But he always came back and watched the boxing. So we always watched right from the early days, from your Nazim Hamid, even your Barry McGuigans, Nigel Benn, Eubanks, coming through to Tyson, Bruno, Lewis, and that was the sport. And it always fascinated. I was always in awe of it. I don't know. I'd think about it for days afterwards. I can remember just being in the playground, just thinking about what I'd seen the night before. And sometimes, if I'd seen a Mike Tyson fight, I'd still be petrified. I would not sleep. That a human being like that existed on this planet and could do that to other people.
I've seen recent videos of Mike Tyson.
Mate, listen, whatever supplements that man is on, get me some. Give me some of Mike Tyson's vitamins supplements, because he looks like a beast again.
So when we all go back out drinking on July the 4th, when the pubs are open and everyone's off the red on coke kicking off, I've been on the Tyson drugs and I can look after myself. You know what I mean?
You'll be safe. You'll be safe. But it was during that sort of time. So it was probably about when I was in college. I'd always been interested in martial arts. Martial arts films always got me, all the Bruce Lee ones. And then I remember people talking about this form of martial art where an old guy would fight anybody. This old little guy would beat anybody, and I didn't know what the name of it was back then. And obviously, it was jiu-jitsu. Talking about the Gracie jiu-jitsu system, and I remember that then they talked about this ultimate fighting where for all these different disciplines were going into this cage, and they were fighting in a cage, which was crazy enough to think about at the start. And I was fascinated by it. I half didn't believe it existed. And then when I was at I think it was university in the first year, a VHS tape was making the rounds, and I had to wait my turn for UFC 1. I had to wait my turn for this to come round. And when I watched it on my own, I didn't like that. No one else was really interested in it. I watched it on my own on my little TV in my little digs, and that was it. I was hooked. I couldn't believe what I was watching. That first fight where the front kick comes and the tooth comes flying out, and from that moment onwards.
Yeah, it was Taylor Tooley against Gerard Gordeau, wasn't it? And Taylor Tooley, obviously, is a sumo wrestler, so his instinct is to just charge at someone and do them palm strikes that obviously sumo wrestlers do. And Gerard Gordeau just sidestepped him, kicked him in the head, and then hit him. And his tooth flew out, didn't it? His tooth flew out.
Yeah. You had me at that. You had me at that. And since then, it's been like I've been totally obsessed with the sport. So back then, you'd only get one or two videos, VHSs going around for a while. It took a while for it to come on TV. So I'd hunt it out. So I'd watch the cage rages when I could, all the way through to when the Ultimate Fighter started. And then it started to become almost a regular thing on TV. But you couldn't record it back then. You had to wait up and watch it. And then from there, I educated myself on the Pride stuff, because people started talking about these Japanese events that were bigger and better than the UFC. And I was like, well, how's that possible? And then I turned on that Lenny Hart starts screaming these names. There's 120,000 people in the Saitama Arena, and they've got a 150-pound man fighting a 600-pound man. And I'm like, this is just getting better. It's ridiculous.
It's brutal. It's like when I was talking earlier about the Bob Sapp against Nogueira. And Nogueira, you know, his jiu-jitsu is just, well, you don't need to hear it from me, but, you know, anyone will tell you his jiu-jitsu is amazing. And the amount of punishment he was taking, like you said, you know what I mean? The amount of punishment he was taking, and he would just end up winning, wouldn't he? And how he got powerbombed off that, I only thought that was a wrestling move. Like, I thought you would need help in order for that move to happen. Like, right, mate, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift up for you so then you can do the move on me. But he just fucking slammed him.
He did it. But that was the craziness of it. And people like there's the UFC is so big now. It's like, and it's got such a following from different eras. So Ronda Rousey brought a new set audience. Conor McGregor brought an absolutely new audience. And it's weird to think that chunks of those audiences won't know what was happening back then because it was the Wild West. But it is the greatest era of MMA. It is the most.
That's the reason I wanted to do this podcast, because I want people to know about this. I mean, I was saying to when I done the podcast with Ken Shamrock, I said, you know, I was watching the Cerrone and McGregor press conference, and I was talking to these guys next to me, and they were like, "Oh, the reason I got into this was because of Conor McGregor." Which is obviously, you know, he is, you know, as a businessman, he's probably the best businessman in MMA, Conor McGregor. Do you know what I mean? As well as being a very skilled and talented fighter. And they're like, oh, the reason I'm in this is because of Conor. And I said, have you ever seen any of the UFCs, the early ones? And they were like, no. I was like, it doesn't get documented enough. And that's why I wanted to do this, you know. No. But talking about like the Bob Sapp powerbomb, like people will be listening to this now and watching this going, fuck off, they didn't do a powerbomb on someone. Surely that's not right. Go on YouTube, right? Type in Bob Sapp against Nogueira. It was an actual powerbomb, and it was in a real fight, right? But not only that, there was a suplex that Fedor Emelianenko done to, Kevin Randleman done to Fedor Emelianenko onto his neck.
Yeah. Spiked him, literally tombstoned him into the ground. And you thought you were watching a murder. You absolutely thought that was it. But Fedor somehow came out and got the submission in that fight, and it was. And you watch it, and that's the other thing. People don't know Fedor properly. They know him from this era, where you're watching him in poor matchups against people who, well, let's face it, they're not in their prime as well, and they're putting on their great names, but they're not the matchups they would have been sort of 10 years ago. And Fedor, BJ Penn, who else could I think of? Those sort of fighters where you kind of wish you could jump people back to see how good they were, why people talk so highly of them. Yeah, exactly.
One of the examples of that is Mirko Krokop, because, you know, you look at his early days in Pride. I mean, fuck me, he was knocking everybody out with the head kicks, you know? And see, that's another move you rarely saw in MMA, you know? I mean, obviously, he knew how to grapple as well, which helped. This was when well-rounded fighters were starting to make their mark in MMA. And this is where strikers were sort of looking at grapplers going, well, if I learn how to grapple to an extent, I can overcome what they're doing to me, and then I can work on my strikes. But fuck me, I mean, he was literally just smashing people with head kicks. And not only that, soccer kicks on the floor. I love the way they invented it as a soccer kick. Someone's head the fucking
soccer kicks and head stomps.
Yeah.
Oh mate, but you watch it, you see that the likes of your Crocops, Vanderlei Silva as well. Still to this day, in MMA, he is as scary to me as Mike Tyson was in boxing. His walkouts, his intensity, his fights, even into the UFC. You go you jump back and you watch his fights against Rampage Jackson, people like that, and they're amazing bouts. These are monster matchups, and they're in their prime, and you just want people to get a taste of not the end of these careers where people are like, well, BJ Penn isn't that good, is he? Really, he was one of the greatest. Chuck Liddell isn't that good, is he? They just know him from that horrific Tito third fight where he looked like he just looked like he was on ketamine or something as he was wandering around the cage. But
the amount of times he was going to retire as well. I mean, I remember when he fought Nick Diaz, and his face was just, and he just said, "Look, I can't do this anymore." And it makes you think, you know, fighters, you know, obviously they earn a lot of money now, you know, compared to the average person. But when it comes to the sort of shelf life of a fighter, and you see the damage that they've done to themselves, surely you'd think there'd be some sort of, I don't know, pension policy that the UFC would maybe put in for fighters who've been there for such a long time, especially the ones that started it off. I mean, Mark Coleman, you know, didn't he sold one of his titles or something online so he could have an operation on his hip. Is that right?
Yeah, so Mark Coleman is another one. He was a UFC champion way back when. I think we're talking, maybe UFC 9 or UFC 10 that he sort of stepped in there.
He won the title. He won the tournament. The tournaments were still going.
And he came from that pure wrestling background. And he was a beast. He looked the part as well, and he fought all over the world, and he really made a mark in wrestling. And he was a good, outspoken person as well. So he was a character in the sport as well. Yeah. But then obviously the years of training, the years of bad training as well, because the evolution of how people train. Now, training used to be fighting. So you'd turn up 3 times a week and you'd fight. You wouldn't like technically spar or light spar. You would fight. That from the people I've talked to from way back when that is just what it was. You turned up, you fought, and then that was you getting ready for a fight. So he had years of damage, and the amazing thing was he had a hip replacement. And I forgot which season of The Ultimate Fighter it was, but he came in as one of the coaches, and he should have still been mid rehab, and this was 2 weeks after his operation, his hip replacement, and he's wrestling with the guys. He's in there, and he shouldn't have been doing anything. He should have been doing basic rehab, and he's wrestling with monsters, teaching them moves, sparring with them. And then the sad thing was, I think he got some sort of infection, and then the hip replacement didn't take, or something like that, and he was basically crippled. So there was a huge GoFundMe campaign for him to get surgery. There's no insurance, there's no pension, as you say, with the UFC. And it came to the point where he's selling his titles, these things that he earned with his heart and his soul, and that he laid it all out there under this big spotlight, and everybody around it got to enjoy. But that's the brutal part of the game. There's no certainty in this. You can have, and the career window, you can't say, right, I'm going to do this till I'm 65. I'm going to work till I'm 65. Your body might give up. There's so many variables. You could get injured in training. You could get injured in a fight. You might take a bad fight. You might get a bad knockout, and you might take a fight too soon again and not have recovered properly. It's the brutal part of the sport, and it's one that luckily they've sort of highlighted later on in the years, or more recently in the years, and CTE now people are more aware of the type of training you can do. A lot of people like Cowboy Cerrone, these old school guys, say I don't spar anymore. I know how to fight. I just have to do the technical stuff. So seeing that people like that who are in the gyms and have been in those wars are changing how they do their training as well. That's the evolution of the sport, and that's the exciting bit. Hopefully we'll get more longevity. And we'll get more support for fighters.
It's great how it has reformed though as well. But then you look at somebody like Conor McGregor. I mean, that man is just a step ahead of the game, isn't he? I mean, obviously he's got his whiskey out now, so he doesn't have to fight. I mean, someone asked Dana White about, do you think Conor McGregor will fight again? Because he's come out, he's retired a couple of times, hasn't he? And then he's come out of retirement. And Dana was like, well, to be honest, if I just earned £100 million for fighting Mayweather in a boxing match, why would you want to come back? Do you know what I mean? The amount of punishment that you go through and the amount of injuries that you end up getting through fighting, I mean, he is a smart man, Conor, for taking that move. But then you look at the likes of Shamrock. Fuck me, that man would fight on a Zimmer frame, wouldn't he? He could be 90 years old. Dana White would bring him and say, Ken, you've got to drop out. He'd be like, fuck it, I'm there, wouldn't he? Because he said in an interview, right, and I'll always remember this. I think it was a Bellator fight, and it was when he fought Kimbo Slice. They're like, Ken, you're like 53-year-old. Why do you still fight? Do you have financial problems? He was like, nah. He said, people play golf when they retire. People go fishing when they retire. I just like to fight. Like, he just loves it. You know what I mean? And I just thought that was brilliant. But going back to the Pride days as well, when you were talking about Fedor, and did you see when he fought that guy who was the kickboxer, who was like 7'2" or something like that? The Chinese kickboxer. He was like 7'2". And you look at that. Yeah. It was a fucking circus. It was an absolute circus. You look at that fight and you just go, how is this? And Fedor beat him. But the beauty about Fedor was he was beating people with arm bars. He was knocking people out. He just had so much to his arsenal that a lot of fighters didn't have then. And a lot of people say, that he was the greatest of all time. And it's such a shame that I suppose the modern generation didn't really see that side of MMA, you know, with people like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and Fedor, especially, you got to think of his background. The base that people came in was pretty much their fighting style. So, if you're a kickboxer, that's what you came in and you did. And if you're a wrestler back then, that was what you did. You didn't really have a well-rounded skill set of a good base of jiu-jitsu with some good striking, some good transitions, knowing how to use the cage or the ring to get up or stand up. Whereas Fedor came from combat sambo, and combat sambo is now made famous by Khabib Nurmagomedov. It's the closest, I think, discipline to an MMA base that you'll get. And I think Fedor, because sambo incorporates judo, jiu-jitsu, striking, wrestling, and it all brings it together. So I think as a base, MMA sort of head start on everyone else, because that as your initial martial art, and you being a world champion at that, and a Russian champion, that is almost like cheating in that era, because you got the likes of Krokop, who just came in as a straight stand-up kickboxer, yet you could do all those different things.
Yeah, exactly. And like I say, you know, the combat sambo competitions, they were just on mats, weren't they? It was like you would just go to a judo tournament, but instead of people trying to throw each other for the Yappon, for the, you know, or for the hold down, or for the wazari, whatever it was, you know, it was people actually throwing kicks in there with leg locks, with, you know, round kicks to the head. It was just brutal. But going back to the early UFCs, and obviously there was a crossover with Pride as well, wasn't there? Because you had sort of, it got to the point where MMA was like when WCW and WWF were the competitors with each other. Because obviously you had Pride over in Japan. You had obviously the UFC. UFC had their golden boy, which was Chuck Liddell. Pride had their golden boy, who was Wanderlei Silva. And even then, it still got to the point where, like, who is the best in the world? But now I think we've just got UFC just takes the monopoly on it all. UFC, Dana White has become the Vince McMahon of it all, hasn't he? Do you know what I mean? And he has literally just said, right, UFC, obviously you've got Bellator as well. But Pride and the mismatches as well, I thought, as well, were just absolutely crazy. And the weight differences. Royce Gracie, when he fought Akebono, I mean, Akebono is 600 pounds. And Royce Gracie was, you know, he was in Royce Gracie's guard. And I was sat there watching it going, that's not a guard. He hasn't got his fucking legs wrapped right round him. Do you know what I mean? It was crazy. And Royce Gracie still... and Royce Gracie still managed to win with the armbar, like from his back, which just proved the power of jiu-jitsu. So yeah, Royce Gracie obviously was the guy next door, and he was the one who went into the first ever UFC. And what I found fascinating was he fought Art Jemison, who was a boxer and was a very respectable boxer at that. But the fact that he fucking walked in with one boxing glove, I mean, come on.
He's still dining out on that, though. He turns up at the UFC expos wearing one glove. He's got it's obviously like his little thing now, but he realizes how ridiculous it is now. But at the time, he thought, well, that's my power hand. I've got to do that, and a glove will help me cause more damage because I can hit the person harder. But yeah, madness! What an image that was.
I know, without breaking his hand as well, I suppose, because obviously he can grab with this hand and then obviously punch with his power hand. But it's funny because I watched a documentary on when they were talking about the early UFCs, and Art Davey, there was him and Horion, who sort of got the first ever UFC together. He said he remembers picking Art Jemison up from the airport, and he was just saying how scared he was, and he just looked like he didn't want to be there, because I think reality sort of hit him, you know, that he could either get kicked in the leg or he could, you know, someone could knee him in their head or they could take him down. Because it was really weird, because when Royce Gracie fought him, he just took him down and mounted him. He didn't even get him in a submission. And he just sort of tapped out straight away, you know?
Yeah. But it's hard to describe. People haven't done jiu-jitsu, and that's one of the crazy things when people say it's boring watching the ground game. You've got no idea what that pressure is like. When someone knows what they're doing, how much pressure they can exert with their hips, it is like drowning. That is the best way of describing it, because you cannot breathe, you cannot move. There's nowhere for you to go. And every time you make a move, you put yourself in more trouble. It's like you're getting into deeper and deeper water. But I get it. I've done that. I've rolled before and just tapped to the pressure of someone on top of me. And they go, "Are you all right?" But unless you felt it, you can't really understand it.
Yeah, it's crazy because there's a lad who trains at our gym, Andy, and he's amazing at jiu-jitsu. And he's just so wiry, and you're just like, fucking hell, where you're at? Do you know what I mean? Like, you're just strolling all around you. And like, and it got to the point where, because when I roll with someone who's lighter than me, I try and not to use my weight. I just use technique. And in the end, John just went, fuck it, just squash him. And in the end, I just fucking squashed him like that. And he sort of just
give in between there, give it, motivate him to death.
Have them bitch tits in your face, you know what I mean? It was just like that. And he couldn't really move. And then because he was getting like out of breath because I was on top of him, that's when I got the key lock, the figure four. But that was the only way I could seem to beat him, because his jiu-jitsu is just incredible. You know what I mean? How wiry he is. I mean, from his guard and stuff like that. But like you say, that was the sort of first thing. I mean, even when the second fight Hoyce had, when I watched that, I was like, Ken Shamrock's going to kick your ass here, because I think I knew of Ken Shamrock in the WWE before I started watching UFC, you know, and even then, Ken Shamrock's, he's a fucking weapon, the man, isn't he, you know? And then you see him fight Hoyce Gracie, you're like, you've got an action man versus someone in a judo gi. I mean, anyone.
In pajamas.
Yeah, pajamas. Like anyone who you think would sort of, I think any normal person would probably think, Ken's going to absolutely destroy him here. Do you know what I mean? But the technique, and not only that, I think I was surprised that Hoyce was using his gi to grapple with, and how he was using his gi to get people in submissions, you know, and how he got that choke on Ken was just like so fascinating.
It was fast as well, wasn't it? It was under a minute, 57 seconds or something ridiculous like that.
It was.
But the gi there, that you think about Ken Shamrock, he comes in oiled up, all oil, and there was no regulations then about wrestling on the body to stop grappling. He just wanted to look good while he was out there. Sweaty as well, because they'd fought before. So the gi would have been a real way of getting that grip, getting that friction, so you could set up these locks. Obviously, you can't have it in MMA now, but it's madness when you look back at it and you look at those images of someone in a gi on, someone in the sumo stuff, someone in the full karate outfits, a boxing glove on one of the guy's hands. It's crazy to think that is in eras of sport. That's what, 25, 26 years or something like that for it to move. 96 was the first one, wasn't it? 1996.
Wow, that's incredible, isn't it? Looking back, because if you like, it's like watching a movie. If you think about it, it's Bloodsport. Remember the film Bloodsport with Jean-Claude Van Damme, and you had all these different martial arts.
It's Bloodsport, yeah.
And the funny thing about Bloodsport was there was obviously Van Damme was going to win because he was the main star in it. Do you know what I mean? But there was a guy actually doing sambo, wasn't there? There was a guy in Bloodsport doing sambo. Yeah. There was a grappler in there. But
that's right.
Everyone thought when they would watch a film like that it'll be kickboxers who will win, or it'll be someone who does karate would win because they can kick someone in the face. But they didn't really put the sambo guy into the light that you would see in reality, because it obviously just proved when we were in the.
It's not glamorous, is it? That's the thing. It's just you don't see it as a glamorous martial art. It's a very grind. It's like Greco-Roman wrestling. Who would have thought wrestling would be one of the most dominant bases that MMA has ever had? Randy Couture with that horrible grinding style against the cage. Fedor Emelianenko with that combat sambo background. Habib Nurmagomedov now dominating the lightweight division. They're not the pretty martial arts. All this spinning, flying off the cages and stuff is not the most effective. It might be the most eye-catching, but in a real fight, what we've learned is if you can grab hold of someone, then that's when you can pretty much do what you want with them.
Well, that's it as well. Obviously, when you watch the Blades and Volkov fight over at the weekend, you know, and Volkov knew what he was going to do. It's like watching Khabib. You know what he's going to do, but it's how do you stop those guys who are constantly training day after day, them double leg takedowns? I mean, have you trained with wrestlers before?
I've trained with some wrestlers before, mate, and obviously I'm too old for it now, but it's the most brutal of all training.
Horrible,
but there's
isn't
also a mindset. You get there's a mindset that comes with these fighters, these ones that train wrestling, where and you see it, the Russian style, the Dagestan style, even the American wrestlers, the ones that have done really well in the UFC. But to train and put your body through that regularly, because wrestlers will compete every weekend, Saturday and Sunday. That's multiple matches, as well as the training, as well as the weight cutting. That cuts a different type of human.
It's mad because, when I've trained with wrestlers, they're just at your legs. And it gets to the point where you're absolutely knackered. You're 20 minutes into the session and you're like, mate, will you just fuck off, please? Because you're doing me head in now. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Even when you're in the clinch with them, you feel their strength in the clinch, and you're just like, oh, this isn't going to end well, if I'm honest with you. You know, it's
horrible. It's truly horrible. It's like the worst clingy girlfriend you've ever had in your life. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. She's had too many Jaegers. She's got a little bit horny after her cheesy chips, and she won't let you go while you wait. Piss off, love. Come on.
Yeah, but it's some horrible, greasy, sweaty man, which makes it even worse. Do you know what I mean? But the thing is as well, with wrestlers, I mean, Dan Severn was the first wrestler, really, I think. Oh no, sorry, UFC 2. There was a guy who was a Sambo guy who I think won his first fight, but didn't advance to the next round because he got an injury. But that's another thing, injuries. You know, if you got an injury, you couldn't fight in the next round. You've lost out on the $100,000. You know, you'd be gutted, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's it. And it's I'll totally get it. You think about those formats. You think about mentally and physically how you have to prepare for them. I've commentated on one tournament fight where they'd have to fight one round. It wouldn't be a complete fight. It'd be like a sudden death round, and then they'd get to progress. But even during that, there was long breaks, and you got to think about that, not just physically, how your body loses adrenaline and drops, and then you start feeling the pain and the injuries, but also like just geeing yourself back up physically and mentally for another fight, and then another one, and then not knowing how, like, your opponent might have only had a 30-second fight to get through to his round, whereas you've had 5 hard minutes or 15 hard minutes to get to your next round. Tournament fighting, that was it was spectacular to watch, but my God, I can't even imagine trying to.
Well, no, I know, that's the thing, and obviously, going back to the early days, that's probably why grappling was so successful, because when you were getting takedowns and obviously getting the submission on, and you weren't I mean, Royce Gracie didn't really punch people, did he? I mean, he'd throw the odd sort of dabs when he was on his back to get the submission in there, but he would never, punch people to try and knock them out. And I think that was the secret back then, wasn't it? But even still, when you're grappling, I mean, fuck me, talking at the beginning of the podcast, 3 minutes of doing an MMA fight is enough to tire any normal person out. But when there's no time limits as well, it does make you wonder what is going through the fighter's mind at the time. I mean, fucking hell, you're in a... I mean, Ken Shamrock fought Royce Gracie at UFC 5, and they fought for like half an hour, just solid, no breaks or nothing. Half an hour solid. And then, because obviously no one won, there was no judges. It was like, fuck, we'll have to go for another 5 minutes then. It was like fucking crazy.
Oh God, ridiculous! And that's then you talk about that as a format, and the regulations have now changed. So the problem with that back then is people didn't like it on TV. They didn't like that fighters didn't get a break. They're used to boxing, so every 3 minutes they get to sit down. You see them take some water. You see them talk to their corner. So they brought in these rules where they suddenly applied the 5-minute rounds. They applied the fact you had to wear gloves. They took away all the excess kit, so it was either just fight shorts, valet tudo shorts, or banana hammocks, as we like to call them now. But the whole regulations from that era, they had to change, but not because it was bad for the sport. Because if you're in a real fight, that's what they're trying to simulate. That's what would happen in a car park. You don't get a referee saying, right, that's 5 minutes, go grab a drink. You would you'd fight till somebody won or somebody gave up.
I love the analogy of in a car park. Basically, that's what it was, though, wasn't it? It was like literally, it was a car park brawl. in a cage, you know? And not only that, I mean, groin strikes, fucking hell. Like, remember when Keith Hackney fought Joe Son and he had him in side position and he was repeatedly just punching him in the knackers, and he clearly didn't have a box on, because he was just hitting him, and you could see like the jelliness of how he was punching. I mean, if it was punching a cup, it would the jelliness. What a way for it! Like, he was literally just punching a cup. And I was just, he would have been punching a cup, wouldn't he? But the way you could just see was his body and how that man was taking that pit. But then again, Joe Son, it was an absolute nutcase anyway, because I think he's in prison now for murder or something. He's in prison. He's in prison for murder. And I think he got an extended sentence. I mean, how you can get an extended sentence from a fucking life sentence is beyond me, because he murdered his fucking cellmate. So if anyone can get hit in the balls that many times,
we just need to make sure this guy never leaves. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And this is a guy who literally, I mean, I suppose if you're that crazy and you can put your mind into that sort of mentality, that is probably the only person who could take that many strikes to the balls. But it's like with when Gary Goodridge fought that guy who was in a Vale Tudo competition, and he was putting his feet in the guy's trunks. Remember that?
Oh, I do remember that. He's talked about that, yeah. And do you know the fact that he actually, before he did it, he spoke to the referee. So he's in the fight, and he said, "Am I allowed?" So he asked the question, "Am I allowed to do this?" And the referee just went, "Yeah." And so that's why he ended up sticking his feet in there and messing with his bollocks. So literally checked while he was in the fight and then went to town on this guy's balls.
It's like borderline gay porn, isn't it? You know what I mean? He's like fucking practically like playing with his cock. I don't think he had a cup on either, the guy. So obviously, if you're like obviously in top position and someone's in their guard and they're putting your feet anywhere near your knackers for the sake of the pain of it, you know what I mean? You would be scared to throw a punch, wouldn't you? Because you're thinking, if I hit him with a good punch here, he's just going to come back with a fucking heel to my bollocks, and then that's me. That's me. It's incredible. And going back to Gary Goodridge as well, I mean, the elbows that he hit that guy with, was it UFC 8 when he hit that guy with those elbows?
I think it was, yeah, that famous image where he's got him in the crucifix and he's just repeatedly dropping his elbows into his face. And Gary Goodridge was my first like MMA fighter interview, and I spoke to him about that. I said, look, obviously that's one of the most famous images from the early days of UFC, one of the most horrific images. And he described it. He said he could feel the guy's head shape changing as he connected with each of these elbows. So brutal, beautiful sport, mate.
So yeah, because I mean, I remember that when the first elbow hit, the guy was out anyway straight away, wasn't he? Once he hit him with the elbow, and he just went like a rag doll, didn't he? It was just literally he sort of just went like this, and then as he was knocked out,
literally
yeah, it just was like this, and it was like Gary Goodridge sort of had a corpse in him. Do you know what I mean? He sort of had each arm like a corpse, and then he was just smashing them elbows down and hitting them with the elbow. I think back then though, you just had to make sure that you were winning the fight. Otherwise, if they do, you know, because they could do exactly the same to you, and especially with there being no time limits, in a way, you sort of don't blame them for keeping going until the referee stopped it. But it's like in UFC 2 when Remco Pardue.
Absolutely. And I think, sorry, I was going to say, you got to think about the adrenaline of turning up to these things as well, because a lot of them had never fought in a tournament like this before. So like you said with the Art Jiminy guy, when he turned up there and was scared because he didn't know, he realized what it was he was going to do. All these martial artists turned up and saw the fights before him, saw people getting dragged backstage and in all sorts of different states. So you got to think that adrenaline of being in there. And if you've got someone in one of those positions, you're going to finish them as quickly as you can and as brutally as you can, because you don't want to be on the other side of it.
Of course you do. And obviously, when I was saying about Remco Pardue, the judo and jiu-jitsu guy, he'd done I don't know what the throw's called in English, but it's called makikomi in Japanese. And he literally got this Thai boxer from France, and he had him on the floor, and he was sort of in like the sort of scaffold position, but he didn't have his head. So he just like, he thought, fuck it, I'll just test this elbow out. And he just went, bang. And his elbow, like the guy's head was sandwiched in between Ramkor Pardew's elbow and the mat. So it was like bang, bang. Can you imagine? So he hit him with one, and then that was it. And he knocked him out, and he clearly, and it's just brutal. But the rules have changed now, haven't they, with the elbows in MMA? There's a bit of controversy, isn't there?
With the elbows?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's still that talk of this 12-6 elbow, and that's the most ridiculous rule in the sport, because from any other angle you can throw it, but 12-6 is one of those ones, and John McCarthy's talked about it a lot, where he says the only reason that rule is in there is because before they signed the rules, a couple of the other judges or the people that were involved in making MMA rules had watched some of these displays where people were breaking bricks with their elbows. So they thought, well, we can't have that. We can break a brick, they'll break anything else. But on the flip side, you can throw spinning heel kicks, you can throw knees to the head, you can elbow an opponent with their head pushed up against the cage from a different angle. But the only thing is it's 12-6, which is crazy. Madness, absolute madness.
It is crazy. I suppose it's sort of a clause of getting away with it, isn't it, really?
Yeah, a lot of the time. So if you can do little things like little tricks, just put an angle on your elbows, bringing it down, or even if you're just doing it from a slight thing, you'll still get the same amount of force. You've just got to be very careful that you don't get warned about it. I mean, the famous one is John Jones is not an undefeated fighter because he got disqualified against Matt Hamill, even though he was destroying him in the fight because he threw 12-6 elbows. So he has a loss on his record for that rule alone.
Yeah. I love how the fact that the only loss John Jones has had is via disqualification. Doesn't it just go to show how good that man is? I mean, he's just an awkward fighter. I think that's the best way to describe John Jones.
He's a spectacularly gifted fighter, and if you just look at his heritage, well, his DNA. Look at his brothers. Both brothers are in the NFL, one of the hardest, toughest sports to get into, and they are first team players in two different teams. He is not just athletically gifted, but very technically. He's one of those fighters that he almost seems different every time he fights. He out wrestled Cormier, which was something amazing to see. He out Shogun Hua. Chida, I did that horrific guillotine where he drops him on his face after a standing guillotine. He's just got a mind that really fits the sport.
Yeah, it was that was the most brutal guillotines I've ever seen. There was that, and there was the Ken Shamrock one against Dan Severn, where Dan just didn't know what to do with his hands, and he was just like tapping like this with both hands. Do you know what I mean? But how he just got Machida with that guillotine, and he just went boom, and he just dropped like a sack of shit. And this is a guy who is, lifetime karate expert, lifetime jiu-jitsu expert. You know what I mean? The credentials this guy's got. But talking about John Jones, there was an interview I saw with Brian Stan, and Brian Stan said in training, he first trained with John Jones. He said, and he was throwing him around. He said a week later, John Jones come back and started throwing him around. This is how naturally gifted and naturally talented John Jones is. But anyway, mate, we're going to wrap things up now. But before we do go, tell us a bit about your colour commentary that you've been doing, because you seem to be all over the world. And obviously you've done colour commentary with people like Frank Mir, who is obviously a UFC legend.
I mean, I'm blessed. I do commentary for a number of different promotions. I'm very lucky to have done it. It's like comedy, though. I kind of fell into it as a bit of a hobby, and then it's kind of spiraled into just a massive part of my life. So I get to travel the world. I've commentated with Frank here. We've done many shows together. Brad Pickett as well is one of my best mates now, and these are fighters that I used to watch when I was just getting into the sport. These are people that I could never imagine sort of hanging out with, like Frank Mir when he broke Tim Sylvia's arm. That's still one of the most graphic things I've ever seen on TV, and Nogueira's as well. And then next thing you know, we're flying to Russia or wherever we are in the world, Brazil, and we're doing these things. So I'm very lucky. I do the play-by-play stuff, so I'm like the John Anik or the Mike Goldberg of a commentary team. But I feel so lucky. I remember I had a little when I started getting into MMA, I had a little goal I set myself. I want to try and get close to the cage each time. So first of all, I was doing backstage interviews. Then I wanted to do press interviews online. Then I'd like to do some presenting. And luckily, I worked my way through quite quickly. And suddenly, I'm sat by the cage and I can literally touch it. I get to see everything and be part of it. I get to travel with the fighters. I get to see and experience parts of the world I never would have gone to doing it. So I feel very, very lucky. I miss it because it's lockdown. I miss a lot. I miss just that part of my life. But it will come back. We've got UFC doing shows. I got a number of shows kicking off again in August. So hopefully I'll be back on the road. And I can't wait, mate. I love it. I feel very lucky, and I'll hopefully do it for a very long time.
Yeah, well, I wish you all the best, mate, because I know how hard you've worked. Not just as a comedian, but you've also, podcasts as well. I mean, I've done one of your Fest MMA podcasts. I remember. I think that was in 2015, and obviously we were talking a bit about MMA. We were talking about when I was on Britain's Got Talent and stuff like that. And even then. I just thought this guy's going to go places, and I'm so pleased that you have, mate. And I appreciate that you've come on this show, especially with your knowledge of fights and stuff like that. It's incredible. And thanks for your support as well, because obviously this is the second one that I've done, and just to try and get the ball rolling with everything. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, mate.
My pleasure, my friend. And honestly, it's great because we've talked about MMA before. When I heard you were doing this, especially the angle of the beginning of MMA, and then you bring Ken Shamrock on to start with, I was like, boom. And I feel a little bit of a dip in quality as far as seconds, but I feel very honoured, my mate. And all the best with it. And thank you once again for having me, all right?
Oh, bless you, mate. It's been a pleasure. Cheers, Bryan.